Guest today is Ramsey Nijem, the head strength and conditioning coach for the NBA's Sacramento Kings, where he's responsible for all aspects of sports performance, including strength and conditioning, sports science, and nutrition. Ramsey earned his MS from the Center for Sport Performance at California State University, Fullerton, and is currently a Doctor of Science candidate studying human and sport performance. Ramsey, really appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate you having me.
Well, listen, maybe we can kick things off here by you telling listeners a little bit more about how you got interested in sports science and your path to the Sacramento Kings.
Absolutely. So my path started during my undergrad at UC Santa Barbara. I had just become a personal trainer, and I remember walking into the sport performance facility where all of the D1 athletes trained, and there was a guy by the name of Jeremy Bettle there. And they didn't have student interns at the time, so I walk in and say, "Hey, coach, I would love to intern if it's possible." And his response was, "Yeah, sure, just send me a resume." So, of course, I did. Didn't hear back. And I followed up probably the next day. Same thing, "Hey, coach, would love to learn." "Yeah, sure, send me a resume." So that we kind of went back and forth for a few days on that, which was probably like a week, but what felt like a month because I was just so excited to try to learn and get in there. What he didn't know is that the gym was literally, right in the middle of my path from school to home. So there was no reason for me not to walk in there. So every day it was easy for me to just annoy him and bug him. But I think eventually he realized, man, this kid's not going to leave me alone. So I remember he sat me down and said, "What do you want?" I just said, "Man, I want to learn." And I said my end goal was to get to the NBA, to which he responded that was his end goal as well. He was interested in getting to the NBA. So fast forward basically a year after that, and Jeremy Bettle took a job with the Brooklyn Nets. So he made his dream a reality, and he took a job with the Brooklyn Nets. He's now the director of sports science or sport performance for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So he's up there in Toronto. And the guy that replaced him was Chip Schaefer. And Chip Schaefer came from the NBA. And, same thing, sits me down, asks me, "Hey, kid, what do you want to do?" And, "Hey, coach, I would love to make it to the NBA someday." To which he responded, "Well, I might know a few people." And so fast forward probably another year after that, and I went on to earn my master's at Cal State Fullerton, and I actually returned back to Santa Barbara to start a strength and conditioning program at Santa Barbara City College, which for the listeners, if they were just to Google Santa Barbara City College Stadium, they would kind of see where I came from, which is a football stadium. We had an outdoor weight room right on the beach, like literally. And so that was an incredible experience, and I spent a year there, after which Chip Schaefer called me up. He had already taken the job with the Sacramento Kings, and he calls me up and says, "Hey, they say I can have an assistant. Are you interested?" And, of course, I said, "Absolutely, I would love to." And so the rest is kind of history, as they say. I spent 2 years here under Chip. Chip's now back home in Chicago with the Chicago Bulls as their director of sports performance, sports science. And they named me the head when he left. So 2 years as the assistant, and then I just finished up my second season as the head.
That's fantastic, man. And looking forward today. You recently gave a talk at the Bay Area Sport Performance Symposium this year called Workload Monitoring in Team Sport, Science and Practice to Impact Performance and Injury Risk. So we're going to dive into that today. Can you start by maybe defining workload and perhaps highlighting the differences between internal versus external load?
Yeah, of course. The talk kind of revolves around really the literature review of what my dissertation is on. Obviously, when it comes to workload monitoring, there's a million things you can track. In general, it's kind of this idea of just tracking data that may give you an idea of how the athlete is feeling or what state they are in as far as recovery versus readiness. The big one obviously is internal versus external workload variables. And internal is the physiological or psychological stress that's imposed during your training activities, while external is the work that's completed. So examples that you typically might see are something like a session RPE or a heart rate variability or blood markers. Those are things we typically would categorize as internal because those are giving us an idea of the response that the athlete is having to the work that they're completing. And then examples of the external are the speeds they're moving at, the distances they're covering, their accelerations and decelerations, balls thrown, for example, if you're looking at pitchers or tackles performed. So that's how I kind of separate it in my mind is what did they do that's external and how are they responding that would be internal.
And what's the relationship there between workload, fatigue, and injury risk?
Yeah, It's really tough to say. I think that there's some things that are in the literature now that would suggest that there certainly is a relationship between training load or workload and injury risk. And I think the easy one, the way I like to tell my coaches here is, hey, coach, if an athlete does too much, then they're probably at an increased risk of injury. And if they do too little, then they too are probably at an increased risk of injury. So that's kind of that balance of preparation and under preparation and then overtraining. So we don't really want to have athletes that are, in a state of overtraining, at least not for a long period of time, obviously. And then you definitely don't want athletes that are underprepared for the demands of their sport.
And of course, in team sports, that's always tricky to manage on a practical sense, because you got guys who are logging starters minutes, you got guys who are coming off the bench logging a certain amount of minutes, and some guys who may not see the floor so much. So how do you guys go about using that information and then to inform how you do things when it's practice time or time to hit the gym?
Yeah, absolutely. It's and that's one of the tough parts about the NBA, right? Is the 82 game schedule, but then within that, you have those guys that are playing, your rotation guys or your high minute guys, and they're playing every night anywhere from 15 to 35 minutes a game, and then you have the guys that are also doing all the traveling and everything else, but they're just not seeing the floor. So that's one of the fun challenges, I think, of our environment is how do we make sure the athletes at the end of our bench are prepared and those guys are ready for this, and the guys that are playing, how do we keep them within a safe zone, if you will, from an injury risk perspective. So, the guys that are playing a lot, we're typically not adding load to their kind of load history. Those are guys that we're encouraging recovery for, and we're looking at the schedule and telling them hey, we got 4 and 5 coming up. Let's prepare for that on the front end. Let's make sure our nutrition is dialed in on the front end. Let's make sure our sleep habits are dialed in the front end. Let's not wait until we get to those loads, and at which point we're kind of playing behind the ball and trying to play catch up. And then on the other end of that, it's the same idea with the guys that aren't playing. Hey, you're not playing, you're not getting the loads that these guys are getting, but yet at any moment you may be asked to jump in that game and perform. And so we're trying to expose those guys to our workloads or to the workloads that we might anticipate. So if it's just encouraging coaches to let them play a little more 3-on-3, right? If you got the 6 guys that aren't playing, maybe those guys are just playing more 3-on-3 while the rest of the guys are just watching film. Or it might be, hey, you all went through a practice that day, but you 5 don't play. We need to expose you to the high-end accelerations and decelerations that these guys are getting in games. So let's get on the court and let's go through a few reps of really hard accelerations. Let's, 3/4 court sprint, and let's slow down really fast and really expose the systems to what you might be seeing in a game.
That's terrific. And of course, you mentioned too much being a problem, too little potentially being a problem. And so for that, acute to chronic ratio for listeners, is there sort of a sweet spot there that, in the literature at the moment we're kind of looking at in terms of trying to achieve?
Yeah, I don't know if there is or there isn't, but I do know that the literature would suggest at least that acute chronic workload ratios of 0.8 to 1.3 are quote unquote this sweet spot. And so for the listeners, an acute chronic workload ratio is typically just calculated as the sum of your previous week's worth. So the sum of 7 days, usually it really could be of any metric you want to track. But if you want to track distance ran, for example, what's the total number of miles completed over 7 days, and then you would divide that by your rolling average of the previous month. So you would take the sum of the previous month in miles covered and then divide that by 4, and that would give you a chronic load. And the ratio between those, the acute versus chronic, gives you a number that if it falls within 0.8 to 1.3, then you might say this guy's in a safer zone. And if it's outside of those areas, either on the underside or the overside, then you might think, well, this athlete might be, a little bit underprepared, or this athlete may be a little bit overtrained, or we may be asking them to do a little bit too much. So, yeah, I don't know if that necessarily is an actual sweet spot, but certainly in the literature there are suggestions that is a sweet spot.
And we talked before the interview about sort of averages versus individual responses. So could you dive into that a little more for listeners as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously, in general, in sports science, what's typically reported is these group means or these averages. Or if you take a group of 10 people, for example, and let's say you track the acute chronic workload ratios of everybody, and what we may find within there is, this idea of a sweet spot being 0.8 to 1.3, but because those are group means and these are group averages, it's very much possible that one individual in there had a much higher acute chronic workload ratio, or another individual had a much lower acute chronic ratio. And we see that a lot in the literature, not only just in kind of workload monitoring, but we see it throughout the sports science literature. So, if we're talking about squat training to improve vertical jump and you get these group means, and while it may be true that squatting may improve vertical jump, certainly within a group of 10 people, it's possible that 4 of them improved, 3 of them were neutral, and 3 of them actually decreased in their vertical height. So that's something that we just try to appreciate and consider, is this idea of, well, at the team level, there may be some trends at play, but really we want to appreciate the individual and whether or not they're getting everything they need, or whether or not they're truly in a risky area or a sweet spot. And to me, that's where the context comes in, right? Is for us to really understand the individual, while the acute chronic gives us an idea. If we really want to know if they're in a sweet spot, we probably want to bring in some of those other measures, such as wellness surveys or wellness data, or HRV, if you will, or some of your force plate data. So to me, you start building the context around the individual rather than worrying so much about the group means or the team trends.
Yeah, very well said. It's amazing how that acute to chronic sort of gives you that 30,000 foot view. And as you mentioned, kind of getting multiple variables, giving you more of this complete picture of what's going on for the individual athlete being so key. And so what do you do then when you find that you've got an athlete that's much more tolerable to increased workloads, whereas maybe somebody else in the starting five, isn't able to tolerate nearly as well? Are there some strategies that you use, whether it's in-game and practice, fueling, etc., to help mitigate that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at least we try. When we do have, I think on one end, I'm not too worried about the guys that are able to tolerate those loads. Those are the guys that we want. Those are the guys that we would just label kind of as more resilient. If you can handle changes in workload, whether it be high or low, or the responses of that, right? Because typically what you'll get is if you do have an acute chronic workload ratio on the low end, let's say 0.7, which would suggest that this athlete's done 70% of their chronic loading. Well, typically what that means is within the following week or two, there's going to be a spike in workload that might result in an acute chronic workload ratio of above 1.3. But for your more resilient guys that are able to kind of bounce around this ratio, those are the guys that we might label as more resilient, and hey, they're just better able to tolerate these changes and these swings. And we've all seen it. Anyone that's been around kind of the elite sports setting or athletes in general, you see the guys that can handle these changes in workload, and it doesn't matter if they've done 200% of their workload or 50%. They feel the same, they act the same, and so those guys don't really concern me much, because those are the guys that we're just lucky to have, and there's probably a little bit less, I think, anxiety around the response of them. Now, the guys on the other end that can't seem to tolerate changes in workload, yeah, I think that there's a lot of effort and education and encouragement on the recovery side. Hey, I know you feel all right, but let's make sure you're getting in to the cold tubs. Let's make sure you're getting your treatment. Let's make sure that you're eating the appropriate things. Let's make sure you're actually sleeping and not going out and partying and all of those things. So to me, it mainly comes down to really just staying on top of them and trying to educate them. We don't do too much of the game manipulation stuff. Very rarely is it that I go to a coach, say, hey, coach, this guy is, I'm flagging this guy as injury risky, and we want to limit his minutes. That's a very rare occasion. And usually if that is the case, like that's probably happened only a couple times in my career, that usually started with something like an acute chronic workload ratio. And then I followed up that number. I might say, okay, well, that number looks like a 1.7. That might not be good. Let me go talk to that athlete. From there, we'll take that wellness survey and we'll have that conversation with them. And, so if they confirm, yeah, man, last week was really tough on my body, I'm not sleeping well, I'm hurting. Okay, cool. Now let's go have a conversation with coach. Coach, what do you think about this? And then from there, we might look at the schedule and we might say, okay, let's look at this game and this game. Which one of these games does it make sense to pull back a little bit? And to me, that's the way that I try to bring in. I really try to make it more about the team rather than a number. It's, hey, this number gave me some insight. Let me check in with the athlete. Okay, athlete confirms. Hey, let me check in with the training staff. Hey, what are you guys seeing? What do you think? Okay, we're all on the same page. Let's go to the coach. Coach, what are you thinking? When everybody's involved in that decision-making, then I think the idea of resting for gameplay just becomes a little bit more, I think, tolerable or acceptable, rather than, hey, this guy was a red, quote-unquote, because the literature says so, and therefore he can't play. Like I think the latter there is probably not the right way to do it.
That's terrific. Yeah, very well said in terms of getting everyone on the same page. And when we talk about that player who's unable to tolerate some of the workload, you mentioned things like nutrition and sleep and just life stress. Are there certain ones that are more common than others for you, for a player, if they are unable to tolerate workloads that might be cropping up more often, whether it's on the sleep front or nutrition or things that you guys want to address?
Yeah, I mean, the two big ones that come to mind are sleep more, and obviously the sleep is going to be influenced by a lot of things, primarily what's going on at home. So both literally, like if you just have a bad sleep environment because you have your friends up late at night playing games while you're trying to sleep next door, but then also kind of figuratively as far as stress goes, and maybe you're newly married with a kid and something like that. So trying to manage some of that so that they can just get more sleep. Like to me, just getting more sleep is critical. And then also nutrition is obviously another critical piece to it. With these guys, it's really just encouraging them to eat more. Like there's food available 24/7, and like it's crazy. There's breakfast. We have 2 full-time chefs, so as soon as they come in the door, there's breakfast. Whether it's a buffet that's out, or they could get their food made to order. After either shoot around or practice, there's lunch. If they want to take something to go, they can do that. When we're on the road, it's breakfast. And there's the pregame locker room meals that guys are ordering. Postgame on the charter, there's food, and in meetings, there's food. So there's so much food. The food environment is there, and so for us, it's really just encouraging them to eat, because a lot of these guys just grew up playing ball, and they don't even consider all the other factors that might go into their performance. And especially if you're, with Sacramento Kings, we had like 10 guys under the age of 25. So a lot of these guys are just learning to be an adult when it comes to their nutrition and sleep habits, let alone an adult in the NBA. So, yeah, it's a lot of education, but I think for sure getting more sleep, and then eating more are the two big ones we try to push.
Yeah, it's great to have that environment where the players can, as you mentioned, the education, being able to grow. Obviously, we're in the midst of the World Cup of Soccer. We had Ronaldo there scoring 3 goals, and he's over the years. They talk about his nutrition and the fact that now he eats 6 meals a day, he never misses his regime, and this is definitely something where the environments you guys create in the NBA now is terrific for that, because the guys do have access to all that stuff. So great to see on that front. And that kind of shift gears here a little bit because the NBA draft is coming up this week. You have a lot of young, talented players in the Sacramento Kings. From a strength coach perspective, when you're in the gym, what are some of the key fundamentals there that you're looking to instill in your young players?
Yeah, I think the big one we're trying to instill, I think, is just habits. I think it starts there, and that's the fun challenge for us. Is we got these guys that are literally, a lot of them are one and done in college, and so they haven't been they went from AAU basketball to maybe 1 year in college. Probably didn't do much in high school as far as strength and conditioning. Probably didn't do much in college as far as strength and conditioning. So by the time they get here, their training age is so young that, yes, the strength and the conditioning are important, that we're trying to get at those. But, we're just trying to get them to build habits that have sustained them through a 10 to 15-year career. So I think that's the big one early is, let me just make sure you're getting in here when you're supposed to be in here. Let me make sure you're doing the things that we want. But we're not too worried about killing them as far as volume or load goes. Let's get them in here. Let's get them moving. Let's make sure we're building a movement library. Let's make sure that they're feeling more competent and confident in those movements. And then as we grow through the years with these guys, then that's when the volume and the load start to pick up a little bit on our end. But yeah, just habits early on. Are you taking care of your body? Are you doing the things that we want exactly how we want them? Is our communication good? Are you communicating with me? Are you not liking something we're doing? And if not, let's have that conversation. So I think just trying to build a foundation for these young guys that we could build off going into season 2, 3, and beyond.
Yeah, that's terrific. And it's, when we talk about some of the fundamental lifts, let's say for a basketball player, can you maybe give us a little quick overview of some of the things that you guys focus on with Sacramento?
Absolutely. So squats and trap bar deadlifts are really our 2 big lower bodies that we choose to focus on. And if we're not squatting with some type of load on the bar, then we're probably going a little bit lighter, and we're going to go with some speed. So we love speed squats, and we have elite form on our racks, and we have a portable tendo that we use to kind of cue our intents and our efforts on those fronts. So definitely squatting. And the trap bar deadlifts is a big one that we like. That's probably the one that we get to load up more and have more fun. So we just finished a strength block with some of our guys leading into our summer league, and we had three or four guys hitting 405 for triples, and so that's always fun to just let them grab and go. And I think we're a big fan of the trap bar, obviously, because it places the load on kind of neutrally on your side as far or compared to a barbell, which is going to place that out in front of you. So a little bit safer, allows you to just drive force into the floor, and obviously you're going to get some trunk challenge involved with some of that. So those are probably our two big ones that we like to go with. We're not afraid of any lift, so we do everything. I mean, we bench guys, no problem. We don't have a problem benching guys in here, barbell bench press. And then from there, we just kind of get creative, honestly. So I'm looking around our weight room now. We have center mass bells, we have kettlebells, we have Kaiser machines. Big fan of our belt squat. We use the belt squat a fair amount, whether it's for preparation, so whether it's preparing the athlete for the barbell squat, we'll throw in the belt squat then. Or if it's, we do have guys that don't like to put a bar on their back, one guy in particular. Or because of the long levers we're dealing with, sometimes our guys just have low backs that are just kind of irritated, and so we'll throw them on our belt squat and let them go with that, because we could load the hips without challenging without loading the spine. So, and then obviously all your unilateral variations. Now I'm looking around the room again: rear foot elevated split squats, different lunge variations, step up variations. So yeah, we kind of throw it all at them, but I would say squats and trap bar deadlift are our two favorites.
Terrific. You recently also posted on your Twitter feed there the 30 drills in 30 days, some of the movements that you incorporate with basketball players. Can you talk about a few of the qualities that you're trying to develop there, and maybe some movement dysfunction that tends to occur in some of the basketball players?
Yeah, absolutely. From a movement quality standpoint, I think I'm a big fan of just exposing these guys to anything and everything we can. So from a movement category perspective, squats and hinges, and then unilateral variations, so like a lunge, are kind of the ones that we care to build on. And then just regular push-pull, so whether it's a horizontal or a vertical push, and then a horizontal vertical pull, those are kind of our categories that we want to make sure our guys are competent in. And then within those, we kind of get crazy. So, if it's a movement that fits within one of those categories, we're probably doing it. We've kind of had this 6-week built out leading into our summer league, where the first 2 weeks was really just, we were looking at mainly volume and building their movement library. So reintroducing some of our movements that we care about, like our barbell squat, because some of our guys were out of town for about a month. So we spent 2 weeks building kind of a volume from a hypertrophy perspective, but also just volume from a learning perspective. Spent 2 weeks doing that. From there, we transitioned into our 2 weeks of strength blocks, or a strength block. And there, we're just looking to get some heavy weight going. While we're doing that, we're introducing some of our speed and med ball throw variations, because what just kicked off today, going into the next 2 weeks, will kind of be our speed power blocks, where we're focusing on throws and really just focus more on speed. So, today we're doing barbell jumps with depth med ball push presses, where you drop off of a 12-inch or 18-inch box. As soon as you hit the ground contact, jump up with the med ball and release into a push press, med ball push press. So those are that's kind of the layout of that. And then so our heavy squats become speed squats, maybe even band assisted speed squats. Our jumping variations now would include barbell jumps. We'll bring a vertec in, so our trap bar day will become a speed trap bar with also trap bar jumps. And so we're really just trying to build a library, I guess, of hey, can you do anything you want with heavy weight? Can you do it for a lot of reps, and can you do it really fast? And if the answer to all that is yes, then we feel like we're building a pretty robust athlete that has the ability to do whatever we're throwing at them, but also whatever they feel like they should be able to do. To me, a big part of with a lot of our guys is, are you confident to do whatever you want to do out there on the court? And if the answer to that is no, then you're probably limiting yourself as an athlete, because there may be a move or a defensive position you want to get into, but you just aren't confident getting there. So I think it's our job to try to help you become confident in everything.
Fantastic, Ramsey. That's great stuff. And, if we take a minute here and circle back to the nutrition front, obviously, preseason building up for these different training blocks, what are some of the areas that you guys are dialing in with some of your younger players, or even the team for that matter, in terms of, is it overall energy intake? Is it protein intake? Is it, you mentioned meal frequency before. There's certain areas of focus that you guys dial in?
Yeah, I mean, the first one is just energy intake for sure. Again, these guys are just basketball players in general. I don't think they just didn't grow up with the traditional, like, hey, eat a good meal before practice, eat or train, excuse me, or practice, and then eat a big meal post or recovery. Like that's not something they're used to. So I think it's just drilling some of that. Hey, let's make sure we get a good breakfast. Obviously, you're going to have a long practice, and we want you to be able to handle the demands of that. And then let's make sure we're eating a fair amount after. So after we drill intake, or just eat when you eat, not only when you're hungry, but there may be some times where you need to eat when you're not hungry as well, because of just the way these guys are built. And then obviously protein. And so we try to drill protein. We like to recommend and encourage the 1 gram per pound body weight. We're not necessarily, rigorous in our efforts at that. We want to encourage it, with the idea being that, hey, even though you may not get to that 1 gram per pound body weight, you're probably going to get fairly close, which is all we really want, because
for sure allows for some buffer room there.
Yeah, there's definitely some buffer room, but I like to cue and encourage on the high end, knowing that you'll probably miss. Same thing with like post-practice shakes, protein shakes. I don't necessarily subscribe to the idea of like a anabolic window, quote unquote, or some of the nutrient timing research that's coming out. We fully acknowledge that, but we also all acknowledge that because these guys are athletes, if we don't coach them to do something, then they're probably not going to do anything. So we do try to tell them, hey, get a shake after. Our chefs make those, and there's some protein in there, there's some creatine in there, there's some fruit in there. And so we're trying to drive home these ideas of, hey, calories are very good for us to recover. Hey, specifically, protein is probably pretty good for us to recover. And those are the big ones we cue. We don't really, we've never really had to tell guys or talk to guys too much about carbohydrates. And the need for them, and which types and those types of things. If we do have body composition kind of cases, then we'll certainly cue or we'll certainly try to prescribe more complex carbohydrates to those guys that need to gain body weight, and the guys that need to lose weight. Then we'll try to cut back a little bit on those and just replace those with vegetables, just specifically because of the caloric density of those things.
Absolutely, yeah. Great point there, and just in terms of instilling some of those habits, getting the guys used to coming off the court or coming off out of the gym and having a shake, contributing to that meal frequency through the day. Great stuff there. And Ramsey, finally, on the mindset side of things, if we shift gears again, how important is it for players to develop the mental side of their game? Focus, concentration, high-speed decision-making. How can those things start to separate themselves or help the guys separate themselves in the league?
I think they're certainly critical for success. I think that the best guys in the NBA probably have a lot of those things that are tough to measure, that are tough to really, conceptualize at times. But I think those guys are the ones that are just doing a great job as far as being resilient when it comes down to the wire. What kind of confidence do you have with the game on line? Are you the guy that wants that shot? I think building certainly a mental capacity to take on these stressful situations is key. And I think that it's fun for me as both a coach and basketball fan to watch our young guys come in the league and to develop some of those things. And we kind of have an interesting case over here with the Sacramento Kings, where we have a lot of young guys, but we have every single young guy wants that shot. They all want to be kind of that quote unquote hero for the game. And so, which is a good problem to have, right? Everybody wants that moment, and they don't shy away from it.
Absolutely.
So it's certainly a good problem to have, and it's been fun to watch. And we've had some fun games this year with, our point guard, our rookie point guard, De'Aaron Fox, has had a couple game winners. I think like 4 game winners, which is fun to watch. As being I'm watching him. He's 19, 20 years old, and he's really going after these big time moments and is excited to go after them. And it's performing in those situations like he's a vet. So it's fun to watch.
Yeah, it's amazing what the kids can do these days compared, generation ago, guys were going to college 3 or 4 years before they get to the pros, and now, like you said, you get a 19-year-old, one and done, and all of a sudden they're contributing in a big way and hitting game-winning shots. It's amazing.
Absolutely.
Awesome, Ramsey. I want to respect your time here. Last couple questions for you. First one, what do you think the evolution of workload monitoring is in basketball? Let's say, in the next 5 or 10 years, where is this heading?
Oh, man. It's going to be interesting to watch, especially at the NBA level, because I don't foresee wearables being able to be worn in games. So currently, athletes can't wear anything during a game to track data, and I don't foresee that changing. We're starting to see already in the NBA with collective bargaining agreements that there's only a certain number of technologies that have been approved for use, and then within there, players have the right to refuse to wear any of them. And so, it's funny. On one end, I want to say, like, I think that things are going in the right direction, and it's fun to start to gain insight, and I think people are starting to appreciate the insight that can be gained from some of these things. But then on the other end, I'm definitely seeing the kind of defenses be put up, and the players having at least now the right to refuse, and there's not much that we can do about that, which is never really my job. I think as a strength coach or sports scientist, it's never to try to get data from a guy that doesn't want to provide it. It's, hey, I'm here to help, and this is something I believe in, and if you give me the opportunity to educate you on it, then I think there's some things that we can get from this information that'll really help you stay healthy. So, I'm not sure where it's headed. I think that it's certainly moving in the right direction as far as what we're learning when it comes to how injury relates to some of this. But I think as we learn more, what we're also going to be battling with is the challenges to get some of this information from guys and really have to justify why we're getting it. That's one of the issues that we're starting to see is, although some of these things such as acute chronic workload ratio are entertaining to chat about, especially with colleagues and sports scientists and people who really love the literature, there's certainly a big gap between what we think we know in the literature and what we're actually seeing in the practice. And so I think until we can really justify, hey, this piece of data is really going to allow me to reduce your risk of injury, I don't see the NBA hopping on board and saying, hey, carte blanche, everybody collects whatever they want, and players buying into that. So, but now with that said, I do think that where the literature gets to go now is starting to explore, what are the moderators of injury risk when it comes to acute chronic workload ratios? What things, why is it that some players can go have a quote unquote risk threshold at 1.3, like the sweet spot would suggest, versus some athletes can go all the way up to 2.3, right? What are the differences between those two athletes, and how does strength, how does conditioning, how does speed qualities, how do these things influence an athlete's threshold of acute chronic, which really is to say their threshold of changes in workload, right? How does athlete A take on workload changes compared to athlete B, and what are the differences between there? So I think the literature moves towards trying to figure out some of those answers. And then also, hey, maybe acute chronic isn't even that much needed. There was a recent paper that just came out that at least suggested that bringing in the chronic workload from an acute chronic ratio perspective may just be noise, and you may not need a ratio. All you may need to worry about is the acute portions of that acute chronic. Now that complicates things a little bit, because the great thing about acute chronic is that it gives you a denominator of chronic that allows you to create a number regardless of what the acute was. Whereas if you start trying to understand injury risk from just an acute load perspective, well, now there's no pretty number that allows you to easily make it work, and it becomes more specific to sport and athlete. And so I think things get a little bit more complicated, and I think we got to juggle the challenges of the NBA. And so I think there's a lot going on, which is a long-winded way for me to say I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff, and like you said, so many variables involved in trying to pin down, what makes one athlete more resilient than the next, and leads into my next question here. What's the biggest take-home message you give to your athletes on this front of workload monitoring?
Oh, the biggest take-home. I think the biggest one that we try to instill is just make yourself the most robust athlete you can be. And how do you do that? There's signs on our doors that just say own your health, own your performance, and own your career, which are, while I don't think we'll get to a point where we can actually confidently predict why a player gets hurt, I think what we can confidently say is that athletes who do buy into their sleep, who do buy into their nutrition, who do buy into their recovery habits, who do stay prepared from an exposure perspective, if you're at the end of the bench, are you doing things to stay ready for NBA gameplay, right? Are you exposing yourself to decelerations and accelerations and the conditioning? Are you getting in the weight room? Are you making sure that the physical qualities are there? I think, all of those things play a role in creating a robust athlete. So those are the things that I think we try to drive, are like, hey, we get that this sports science stuff is complicated, and I'm not telling you I can predict injury, but I'm telling you that I'm confident if you do all of these things right, that it'll probably help you along the way. And hopefully they subscribe to those ideas and buy in. And we've seen examples of it. I've had Rajon Rondo as a player, and his habits are incredible. Like, he's one of the most prepared athletes I've ever seen. And, I asked him, I said, yo, Doe, have you always been this way, or was this, a result of an injury? Because he was hurt in his career. And he said, no, it's definitely injury. As soon as I got hurt, I bought into this. And same thing, I've had the fortune now to work with Vince Carter, and his habits are incredible. And same idea. He said he's taking care of his body better now than when he was a rookie or a sophomore, that rookie contract, and which is crazy because he's 40 years old now. So, we try to just instill that, hey, if you have the right habits, it's going to help you hopefully avoid an injury. And if it doesn't, well, at least it may help you extend your career. And with the money in the NBA nowadays, adding years to your career could mean millions and millions of dollars. So, yeah, those are the things that we try to drive home.
Yeah, it's amazing if you can have an old head on young shoulders, man. Yeah, that idea of taking care of yourself after someone's been injured or as they get older is definitely a common theme. That's really interesting stuff. And there's a last question for you, Ramsey. On a personal note, I'd love to ask my guests about their morning routines. You're a busy guy. How does the day start? Are you in the gym? Is it coffee? Are you at work? Walk us through how that looks.
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. I don't know if I've ever been asked that. Well, I start by making my bed every morning. That's a big one.
Nice.
So I definitely am a believer in kind of getting that easy win out the way. So you usually make the bed. If we're home, then it's I'm not a huge coffee guy, but I have slowly been becoming a latte guy, which you could blame my girlfriend for that one. I think she got me a vanilla latte once, and I thought it was the best thing ever. So
Nice.
so starting to become a coffee guy, and if it's not an early training session, then it's a sit down and read whatever's on the read list, which is I don't know, 260 tabs deep at this point of papers I need to get to. So if it's usually make the bed, a quick drive in, cup of coffee or a vanilla latte, and then either read or get to training. And if it's neither of those, then it probably means that I'm in a meeting. So usually that's the morning for me.
Awesome, man. This is great stuff, and really appreciate you taking the time today, Ramsey. Where can people stay connected with you and keep up with all your fantastic work?
Yeah, where can they stay connected with me? I'm on Instagram. I think it's just Ramsey_Nijem. Don't quote me on that. So I think that's it though. And then I've slowly been trying to get on Twitter now. Like, I'm trying to become a little bit more persistent or consistent on that. So the Twitter handle is Ramsey_M_Nijem. And those are the two main social mediums I'm on. Not really big on Facebook anymore, and I don't know the other ones, LinkedIn, I guess, but those are the main two. And I'm usually pretty responsive on both of those. So that's been the result of, I remember being young and reaching out to coaches and remembering how I felt when people got back to me. I just thought it was the most amazing thing ever. So it's certainly one of my goals now to respond to every message I get.